Hello, and thank you for joining us on this show on Calaveras Public Access TV. My name is Corey Burnell, and I'll be your host for this special treat. We have a debate, you might say, or more like a discussion between the two candidates for our county sheriff running for office here in the November election. We have our incumbent, Rick DiBasilio, joining us, and the challenger, Gary Stevens. Both of you gentlemen, thank you very much for coming and sharing your time with us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, for our audience, we'll tell you a little bit about the format. I'm going to present an idea or a question to each of our candidates, and they'll each have a couple of minutes, about 2 minutes to respond. And then we'll move on to another question or discussion topic. And then at the end, they'll have their closing remarks. And we'll see how much time we have left for that. Perhaps we'll be able to open that up for lengthy discussion as well. So to begin with, gentlemen, let's have our viewers get to know you a little bit better. I know you've both been in our community for decades and your families as well, and that you've been in law enforcement for many years. So let's go ahead and start with our incumbent, Sheriff DiBasilio, and tell the viewers a little bit about your background.
Well, thanks again for having us. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been in this county since 1978, pretty much spent all my adult life here. I worked in this county, again, for most of my adult life. Spent about 6 or 7 years down in the valley in the hazardous waste industry. Started with the sheriff's office in 2002, and I've been here ever since. I worked my way up through the ranks, got promoted to corporal, was a school resource officer, then went into investigations as a detective, worked some, I was never officially in the drug enforcement team, but because the department's so small, I did work a lot of drug cases, basically everything in detectives from petty thefts all the way to homicides. Then promoted to sergeant, and was there for about a year as a sergeant, and our sheriff at the time, Gary Kuntz, passed away, and I received the appointment. So I was very involved with the budget in the sheriff's office, even as a deputy, because I was a DSA president for about 9 years. So I have a lot of history with the department and with the county. Again, I've spent pretty much most of my adult life up here. I've coached kids. I fostered 10 kids in the county in the foster care program. So I'm very committed to the community. I've never left, other than, like I said, I went down to the valley for a short period of time and then came back, and I've spent my career here. I raised a family here, and my wife now, we raised her daughter here, and she just graduated and went on to the University of San Francisco, as we just spoke about earlier.
Excellent.
So, thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sheriff DiBasilio, for telling our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background. And Mr. Stevens, Gary Stevens, our challenger here, go ahead and let everybody know a bit about yourself as well.
Thank you. My name is Gary Stevens, and I am running for sheriff here in Calaveras County. My career in law enforcement began right out of high school, where I went to community college, Napa Valley College, where I earned 3 two-year degrees, all law enforcement related, and then put myself through the academy. After that, I suffered a significant knee injury, which almost prevented me from going to law enforcement. After rehabilitation, I went into the U.S. Border Patrol. I worked out of the Chula Vista Station after graduating from the academy, and left the Border Patrol, came to Calaveras County, where I started here at the Sheriff's Office in 1989. Worked in the jail for a couple months, and 1990, I started as a patrol deputy. I worked as a patrol deputy, a field training officer, search and rescue manager. I worked detectives. I worked narcotics. I was a hostage negotiator, and I was a resident deputy in Arnold for 2 years. After I left here at Calaveras County, and I went to work for Amador Sheriff's Office, and I worked there for 5 years. I worked patrol for a very short time. I was a hostage negotiator, and I worked detectives, and I worked narcotics there. I left the Sheriff's Office in 2008, where I went to work for the District Attorney's Office in Amador County, where I still remain as an investigator. I've lived here almost 30 years. My wife has grown up here. We've raised our family. We raised our kids here. My whole entire adult life has been spent in law enforcement. I have over 28 years of experience, and my experience is not limited to just Calaveras County. I'm running for sheriff because we obviously have difference of opinions and philosophies and leadership styles. But I ask for people to do their homework, review our websites, Facebook pages, what have you, and make the decision who is the better candidate, which I'm going to say that I am.
Well, yeah, we should expect that, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Stevens. Appreciate that intro. And so let's jump into essentially this kind of gets to why each of you are running. And Mr. Stevens, you just kind of alluded to some differences of opinion. Let's talk about your priorities and objectives that each of you have for the sheriff's office. And challenges that need addressing, items that may need to be fixed or addressed. And this time, we'll go ahead and start with you, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you. The last couple of years, we've seen a decline in what I'll say is leadership in our sheriff's office here in Calaveras County. We have a challenge of not just recruiting deputies, but retaining deputies. We have lost 5, maybe 6 deputies since May of this year alone. We've lost 6 correctional officers in the month of July. And I've spoken to quite a few of them, and it's the leadership style and the work environment in the office. Many people have said that it's pay, it's salary and benefits. Well, they got a significant raise this year. They got a 15% raise. I would love a 15% raise myself. But they're leaving because, like I said, of the work environment. There's complaints of favoritism. There's complaints of lots of things that lack of professionalism inside the office. And I've watched this over time continue. And even before I decided to run for sheriff, there were several things that I saw and spoke to deputies about that it just, it could be so much better. And my experience in my long experience in law enforcement, I see things that are not necessarily easy fixes, but this is the industry standard, and that's not happening right now. So I know time is short and we're on a budget, but there's several issues that I would like to be able to bring up, and hopefully we'll have time afterwards.
Yes, we'll certainly try to make time to cover everything that you gentlemen want to speak to potential voters about. I'll try to keep my comments short so that we do have plenty of time. So let's go ahead to Mr. DiBasilio and talk about your priorities and objectives and challenges you'd like to see addressed.
Well, my priorities are to get the department back up staffing-wise where it was back in 2004 and 2005. And actually, we are at almost that staffing level right now. I have 6 people on the training program right now. We have 10 people in the academy. And when those 10 people will graduate the academy in February, I will actually only be shy 3 people of being fully staffed. We just hired 4 more people for the jail. We still have, I think, 5 positions open right now. And to my opponents' comments about how people are leaving, I don't know an industry. I was in the construction industry for a few years. I was down in the valley, and I don't know an industry around that doesn't have people come and go. My mom said a long time ago, you can please some of the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. You're always going to have disgruntled employees because things don't go their way. But my job is to make sure that our community and my deputies are safe. And the process of getting people hired, we're again moving quickly forward on that. We've got the staffing levels that are back up now. So with the staffing levels to the point that they are now, you'll see our response times go down because we have more people on the streets. We talk about morale, and I employ any anybody that is out there that knows a deputy when they're off duty, not in uniform, ask them how they like it. You have to understand, when people leave someplace, whether it's the sheriff's office or any business, they're disgruntled, they're not happy for one reason or another. So when they leave, sure, they're going to tell somebody, I don't like it there. Talk to the people that are here now and get a true opinion of how good things are at the sheriff's office and how happy they are, because we are moving forward.
Well, thank you for your comments, by the way, and I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions, because one of the items you brought up was response times, and that was on my list here to cover, but perhaps it's not going to take 2 minutes for each of you to address, and so I'm going to combine it a little bit with a discussion on our right to keep and bear arms and your positions on concealed carry, because obviously in a rural county like we're in, response times can be a challenge, as large as the county is geographically, and citizens need to be able to protect themselves at times when life and limb are threatened. So this time we'll go ahead and start with you, Mr. DiVasilio, if you'll address response times and how that may impact your position on the right to keep and bear arms and concealed carry permits, if you want to address those two topics.
Sure. Well, as far as the right to bear arms, I'm very much a proponent of the Second Amendment. When I took over the position in May of 2016, there were about 800 CCW permits out there, and I think right now we're at about 1,600 CCW permits. If people have a good reason, and the good reason is that you want to protect yourself, that's the only reason they need to have to get a CCW through our department. Again, huge proponent of the Second Amendment. What a lot of people don't realize, and they're going to see this change that comes in January of 19, is the requirements that state has put on CCWs has changed. So they're going to find it maybe not more difficult, but a little bit more intensive to get their CCW permits. As far as response times, again, the addition of the people will be able to go back to a patrol schedule that will allow more deputies to be on the street at the same time, so that those response times will go down, because we'll have more deputies out to cover the amount of area. We have a county of almost 1,100 square miles. And if you look at statistics throughout the United States, and especially in the rural counties in California, response times are high. Because if you have somebody that's in Angels Camp and you have a call in Tamarack, running code 3, that's a 30-minute drive. It's a long ways. So people need to be able to protect themselves and be secure in their homes. Again, I think that you're going to see the response times go down just because of the addition of the new people that we have coming on board. And I have, in the past, you hear when people are going to leave, especially when you get into the sheriff's position. I don't hear of anybody wanting to leave now. I do have one guy that's going to be leaving, but he's going to Texas because he's tired of California, not because he's tired of the sheriff's office.
That's interesting. Well, thank you very much, Sheriff DiVasilio, and Mr. Stevens, to address those topics. Yes,
the law is changing regarding concealed carry permits, and it's going to require demonstration of proficiency with live fire for renewal applicants, and the state is trying to not necessarily add more prohibitions. They're just making it a little bit more stringent. As far as concealed weapons permits, our county requires 3 letters of character reference, which Mr. DiVasilio said in February was state law when it's not state law. None of the other foothill counties, Amador does not require it, El Dorado does not, even County of Sacramento does not require 3 letters of character reference. So one of the things I want to do immediately is remove that requirement. It can still be a policy issue as needed, but it's not required by state law, as he said. The Second Amendment, I'm a huge proponent of. I advocate for it constantly. I had a concealed weapons permit before I became a peace officer, and I've even posted that on my website because I was challenged and people said I don't like them. Well, I do like them, and I advocate for them. I advocate for more women to get them as long as they go through the training, they become proficient, and they're comfortable with handguns. So. And to his point, the number of deputies on the street directly affects response times. That is, I guess, a no-brainer, but that's I've lived it. I've experienced it in not just in this county, but in other jurisdictions as well. So the more deputies on the street is actually a good thing for the county and for the citizens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. Excellent. Well, let's go to a question on another position that you gentlemen may have an opinion on, which is there's been a hot topic about sanctuary states and sanctuary cities around the country, California with the notion of a sanctuary state law. And we've seen in other venues people ask questions with regard to federal law supremacy versus state law supremacy on an issue like this, being immigration being the issue. So where do you gentlemen come down on your role as county sheriff, a constitutional office, by the way, and your role in working with or not working with federal law enforcement on the issue of immigration law enforcement? And we finished with Mr. Stevens, so we'll start with Mr. Stevens.
Senate Bill 10 was, still is, in my opinion, a travesty. It's just another law that the state is pushing on us that the people didn't get to vote on. And it falls in line with a lot of the other what we call criminal justice reform laws. And what it does is it mandates circumstances when local law enforcement can communicate and cooperate with federal immigration officials over someone who is detained or arrested that's here in the United States illegally. Granted, we are not immigration officers. I know because I used to be one. I worked for the federal government and did that. But where we run into the issue under SB 10 is somebody has to be not just arrested or detained, they have to be convicted of certain offenses before we're allowed to communicate with ICE officials, Immigration Customs Enforcement, to either put a detainer on them or come get them and remove them so they can be deported from the country. And that's been hotly debated, and many counties throughout the state and jurisdictions, whether it be board of supervisors or cities, have sent a letter to the governor's office saying they oppose it. It doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't have any standing other than just voicing the opposition to that. I know in May when Mr. DiBasilio was asked about that, he said, I'm going to put it back on you. He didn't take a position on it. The position should be that we oppose it. We don't like this, and it's bad for the citizens of this county. More of the conservative sheriffs in the state before the Orange County sheriff, she kind of blew the whistle on it, was they were posting on their website the names, dates of inmates that were going to be released from their custody. And the sheriffs were already doing that until she notified the press that that's what she was doing. And that kind of put the lid on, many of the other sheriffs doing that.
Interesting. Okay. Well, Mr. DiBasilio, your positions on that?
Well, for clarification, it's not SB 10, it's SB 54. SB 10
Correct.
is jail reform.
That's correct.
And I am opposed to SB 54. I said I put it back on the Board of Supervisors because they make the laws, not the sheriff. And that needs to be very clear that sheriffs don't make laws. We enforce them. As far as SB 54 goes, it is a terrible bill. It causes a lot of problems. Fortunately for Calaveras County, we haven't had that big of an issue with it. Since the bill came into effect in January of 2018, we've had 3 people that meet the criteria. One of them was given to ICE because they gave us a warrant. We can't hold them on a detainer by California law. And the second one bailed out before we found out who he was. And the third one did not meet the criteria for us to give him to ICE or to notify ICE. There was a Judge Crandall just ruled on SB 54 for that it violated the California Constitution to charter cities. So the State Sheriff's Association, which again I'm part of, is working on seeing if they can get that incorporated into us. That's charter cities alone right now. We are a general law county, not a charter county. So there is work being done, and I am being part of that work to get SB 54 changed. I don't think it'll ever be repealed just because of the outlook that we have in the state of California right now, but I think that we can make it a lot better so that we can contact our law enforcement partners like we need to do to keep our community safe. And I am supportive of being able to contact our law enforcement partners to do that.
Al, if we could give each candidate another 30 seconds, I'd like a follow-up on that question. So we'll start here with you, Sheriff. The follow-up that I have is, if I can remember it right now, had to do with, so it's state law, SB 54, Senate Bill 54. Now, what consequences are there to the sheriff's office here or the county, perhaps it's budgetary in nature, whatever the case might be, that would come from Sacramento should the sheriff work with federal law enforcement and violate SB 54 prior to a conviction? I think that was the qualification before you could talk.
Right. There are certain convictions that have to have certain convictions before we can contact ICE.
And what if you were to violate that and contact ICE before?
Honestly, I don't know what the actual ramifications would be. I don't know that I want to be the test pilot for
Sure.
that.
Okay.
I don't know if they could cut funding. I don't know if the Attorney General could come after me, because we have to follow the state law. And the state law says that we cannot release these inmates per state law. So again, I don't know of a sheriff, and my opponent has worked for 4 or 5 different sheriffs, but I've been working with the other 57 sheriffs in this county, and 5 of them very closely that surround our county. And all of them we're all on the same page that we don't want to take that chance because we don't know what the ramifications are going to be. Okay. So I don't know if it would open up a lawsuit to the county, and I'm not in the business of trying to cost the county money. I'm in the business to try to save the county money.
And Mr. Stevens, let's give you time to address that follow-up.
Yeah,
as well.
I wouldn't advocate for any sheriff to knowingly or willingly violate that law. It is a state law. We have to abide by it. We don't have to like it, but we still have to abide by it. I haven't heard of any sheriff violating it. That was what I spoke of earlier, was a loophole that was exploited, and it actually had been running a little bit until, again, the press had been notified. Mm-hmm. So I would agree with Mr. DeBisilio. I wouldn't want to be the one to be the guinea pig, and so to speak, in something like that. It's the law, and what happens with the federal lawsuit with the state remains to be seen, because it hasn't been determined yet. But federal law is supreme.
Hmm. Good answers, gentlemen. All right. Well, let's move on to another hot topic then. Literally, it's on fire at times, the cannabis issue, right? So obviously now commercial cannabis has been banned in the county with the current Board of Supervisors. A new Board of Supervisors, maybe it returns. Who knows? Now, I do want to point out that, of course, as law enforcement officers, you're not making policy and you don't pass the law, and you simply enforce the law, as was alluded to earlier. So I don't want our viewers to think that this is an issue that you can cause or make come about. But in the law enforcement arena, what are some challenges that you have seen or anticipate seeing with legalized commercial growing like we did have for a couple of years, and versus some of the challenges with it all being illegal? So we will start with Mr. Stevens. I think it's your turn. And so what are the challenges to if commercial growing is legal versus illegal in your views as the chief law enforcement officer in the county?
It's a mess throughout the state, and it's been a mess here in this county. When the previous Board of Supervisors adopted and passed the urgency ordinance, what happened was it opened up basically the floodgates, and it was an uncontrollable number of people that came into the county. They got permits and they grew. It also, It also,
it's an emergency.
It must be. What happened was we also had unpermitted people that came in, just as many, if not more, that came into the county. And, history has shown us that whenever you legalize something that creates a black market, that's just as big or just as strong because people don't want to abide by government regulations, pay permits, and pay fees, and so on. So it was a challenge all the way around. The first 50 permitted marijuana growers, only 2 passed inspection. So there were lots of challenges, not only with the sheriff's office, but with code enforcement, highway patrol, probation, the district attorney's office. It affected every level of government in this county, even the road department. Personally, I am against commercial growing in Calaveras County. I think all of the Sierra foothills, the Sierra Nevada mountains should be off limits to commercial marijuana cultivation. And the reason is because we supply the water to the rest of the state. We're a big water supplier. This county supplies, I think, about 9% of the water. And when we look at what's going into the ground in a lot of places, and not all, but what's going into the ground and things that have been found in this county, we don't want that in the water because we're supplying that water to someone else. So on just that issue alone is enough to say, no to commercial cultivation in the county. At the same time, we look at, what kind of message are we sending to our kids in our schools that we're allowing something like this? And what do they do when they get out of school? Do they go into this industry, and because they don't go to college, they don't go anywhere else, or they don't learn a trade or anything like that? Is this what we want them to do? We should be proponents of going to college, learning trades, and something else besides just that.
Thank you very much for your positions and views on that. And then, Mr. DiBasilio, the challenges to legal and illegal cultivation in your county?
Well, the challenges are that anytime you have something that's legal, you're going to have the illegal. We saw that. We had 700 people that came in and registered in 2016. We ended up with my guess of about probably 12 to 1,500 illegal grows. Out of the 770 or thereabout grows that were registered people, I think we end up with a 285 or somewhere in that neck of the woods that actually were able to get their registration permits, or that qualified anyhow. Because I was in the trenches, I was out there on the streets, going to these illegal grows and to the legal grows. The legal growers were being compliant. They were following the law. They knew the state law was coming around, so they were trying to be legal. As there is in any business, you have bad mechanics, you have bad doctors. There were some of the registered growers that were not doing things correctly, and we dealt with those accordingly. So I got to go back to what I've said all along. I don't make the laws. We recommended to the board, the previous board, the DA recommended to the previous board that they do not allow commercial marijuana in the county. They chose to do that anyhow. When I became the sheriff, I told them, okay, I already know you're going to do legal marijuana. Don't put it in the residential areas. They did that. So that kind of tells me what kind of influence a sheriff has with the Board of Supervisors, which unfortunately wasn't a whole lot because we had 3 different people telling them don't do it, and they still did it. The challenges are that we're still dealing with the illegal growers. The registered growers that were here, for the most part, they've left because most of those were able to get their state licenses. And the ones that were looking at getting a state license, they wanted to stay legal, so they left. They shut down their operations. It's the illegal growers that we're still dealing with, and we are hitting 2 to 4 of them a week, and we will continue to.
Thank you very much. Very good information. For our viewers' sake, we have run out of time for the show on TV here, but for your sake of getting more information from our sheriff candidates and their ability to give closing remarks and express a bit more of what they wanted to communicate to you today, we're going to go over time, and you'll be able to get the rest of it on YouTube. So I'm going to wrap up the show for us here on TV, and you'll be able to see the end on YouTube with the closing remarks from our candidates. So thank you for joining us on Calaveras Public Access TV, and find this episode on YouTube. So let's go to closing remarks from Sheriff DiBasilio, our incumbent, and go ahead and let candidates know what you'd like to communicate with them outside of these questions we've asked you today.
Again, I've been in this community for 40 years. I'm dedicated to this community. I started at this department. I've never left. When I didn't get promoted to corporal the first time, I didn't quit and go to another department. I stood my ground. I worked and stayed at the department, got promoted, moved on. When I became a sergeant, well, prior to becoming a sergeant, I applied for the position, didn't get it the first time. I didn't quit and leave the department. I stayed at the department and stayed steadfast, worked hard to get that position, which I did. Again, I've never left this department. This is the department I started at, and I plan on retiring from this department for as long as the community will allow me to stay as their sheriff. Again, almost all of my adult life, except for 7 years, has been in this county working and supporting this community, and I will continue to do that. And I hope to get everybody's vote on June 6th.
All right, thank you very much. Well, and it's November 6th
November,
this year,
I'm sorry, no,
yeah.
June.
We're each allowed one.
You gentlemen have run in the primaries in June. So,
yes.
Mr. Stevens, your closing remarks. Address anything we didn't get to.
Yes, thank you. I would like to say that I've lived here in the county almost 30 years, and yes, I did leave this department. I was tired of working overtime and being, I don't want to say broke, but continuously struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. That was one of the primary reasons I went to Amador County, because they pay a lot more. I'm in a position now of where I'm at that I can make a difference in this county through the leadership of the sheriff's office, because, in my opinion, it's not happening. We're seeing a flurry of activity right now of hiring, all the marijuana eradications, which is great, but how come it didn't happen last year or the year before? I submit to you it's because it's campaign season, and obviously he wants to keep his job. But that's the reason. My leadership, my investigative skills are something that I bring to this department in this county that we don't have right now. Things are, like I said, they're in turmoil. I've spoken to a lot of deputies that left, and they tell me things that are going on. I've spoken to correctional officers. So what I'm looking to do is to bring more cohesiveness to the department and make this a place that people are proud to say, I work there and I want to stay here, and keep the retention of officers. We keep, historically, even before he was appointed sheriff, we always hire new kids out of the academy, and there's been no recruiting effort to hire laterals. Earlier this year in debates, I brought this issue up. We need to hire a marketing and recruiting firm. After the third debate, the county decided, or the department decided, to hire a marketing and recruiting firm for deputies and for employees. So it's things like this outside thinking, outside of the box thinking that we need and we don't have. So I ask for your vote on November 6th to help me make this a better Calaveras Sheriff's Office, which is reflective of the rest of the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary Stevens, and thank you, Sheriff Rick DiBasilio, our candidates for Calaveras County Sheriff here in 2018. So be sure to make your choice and vote for one of them on November 6th. And we thank you, our viewers, for tuning in to this debate between the two candidates for our sheriff, and for sticking around for the bonus time here and their closing remarks on YouTube. Go ahead and send the link to your friends and family that you think ought to see their discussion today. Thank you. And again, I'm Corey Brunell.